Now, during this 74 days of lockdown where I recorded a tune every day, I got some really nice comments on my YouTube, including from some guitarists. I love your sound, or how did you get your sound? Which amp did you use? Which mic did you use? Etc, etc. Somebody even said, I want that sound. I have a confession to make. I didn't use a single amplifier or microphone in recording any of my electric guitars at all. It's all software. It's all lots and lots and lots of noughts and ones going inside a computer to generate the sound. Now, we do live in an incredible era of music production because everything really can be done in the box. Now, I've been a professional musician for 23 years, and I've been making my own music, or just recording, for 33. My first machine was a Tascam Porter Studio cassette, and it changed my life. I was able to record another part on top of a part I just put down, and you could pan them left and right and add reverb and all of that stuff. And it was amazing. They were great days. However, of course, there were technical limitations. It was a cassette, it was noisy, you had to keep cleaning the cassette thing and adjust the mechanism and do all sorts of things. And of course, because it was plastic parts, the thing eventually failed and I had to throw it away. Shame. But we've now got a computer that everything can be done in the box. Now, guitarists really are amongst the only sort of traditional recording or studio musicians, if you will, rock and pop musicians, who are more traditionalist than the rest. Now, the reason for that is that the electric guitar relies completely on two components, not just the guitar, but also the amplifier. You know, they are two halves of an instrument. And the first guitar amps appeared in the mid to late 1920s. Fairly small affairs, just to help a guitarist in a dance band be heard, because an acoustic guitar is a very quiet thing. Now, all of those amplifiers of the 20s, they ran on things like this. This is a thermionic valve or tube, vacuum tube, and which was invented really in the first decade of the 20th century, used in all sorts of applications, radio, computers, radar, all of that stuff. And then the transistor came along in 1948 and miniaturized everything. But guitarists prefer valves because of the way they distort. You know, I prefer valves when they distort over transistors. It's just, well, really, it's a sound we've grown up with. I mean, let's face it, if you were a violinist playing in a chamber orchestra, you wouldn't turn up to rehearsal or a concert with a violin that's made of anything but wood. You wouldn't turn up with something made of plastic or carbon fibre. It just isn't done. Even though the thing, you know, you can still play the thing in the same way, it just wouldn't sound right, wouldn't sound traditional. Now, about 20 years ago, slightly more, 25 years ago really, there was some very serious and fairly successful, very successful attempts to synthesize guitar amps. One of the first things was this. This is the Pod by Line 6. I bought this in 1999 and it was fab. I could suddenly get any amplifier sound I wanted just by twisting the control to Black Panel or Modern Class A, Brit Class A. That's like a Fender amp, a Matchless and a Vox AC30 respectively. Massive power that you could have with just a little box like that. Of course, now it's all on board on a computer. I can plug straight into the front of the sound card, which is what I did with my lockdown tunes, and just select a guitar amp. And if I didn't like the result when I was mixing, I just change the amplifier. So the guitar sound is recorded completely clean on the computer. There are a lot of transistors in that signal path. Even the tablet, the phone or the computer that you're watching this on has got tens of thousands of transistors inside it, many of which are encased in tiny little 8-legged chips, for example. Now, my university education was electronic engineering, so I understand what components are. Lots of people, and this is a massive market for vintage equipment. Vintage in inverted commas, or pre-loved, or, amazing vintage this, rare opportunity to get this. It might be a 1965 Vox AC30, for example, and it might say on the advert, all original components, original capacitors, original this, original that. However, Capacitor technology, for example, has advanced massively over the years, mostly with longevity of those components and the temperatures that they can withstand. Now, I don't know if you've ever stood next to an AC30 when it is going full blast and it's been on at a gig for an hour or two, but it is very hot. And inside that amplifier, it's even hotter. So capacitors, they just dry out, they crack and they creak, and they just simply fail to do their job. Now, the trouble is with the purists is that they think they want the Vox AC30 with original capacitors because somebody's told them that they sound better. It's not true. It really isn't true, because components don't last very long. And now you may come across a 1965 Vox AC30, for example, that sat in the cupboard for most of its life, and suddenly it's come out of the cupboard and you're the lucky recipient of it. Yeah, okay, that's a bit different. You then have original components which haven't seen any action, but the chances are you won't. Now, things like hand-wired or point-to-point wiring, that's another of my bugbears, because actually it's less reliable than a printed circuit board. It really is. All it takes is a wire to come off, and they do. You know, if you've got cables going between back and front of an amplifier, all it needs is a couple of jolts, and one of those wires might actually work loose from its mounting point, from its solder. Don't forget, a cable is tiny little strands of copper that are soldered onto the joint. Now, I've done some repairs on amps in the past. I'd had to repair a mate of mine's amp about 4 or 5 times. He said, "Oh, there's another wire off," and he didn't have a soldering iron and didn't have the guts to take the back off the thing. So I went, "Oh, okay, yeah, there it is." And I actually ended up having to go through every joint on that board, just fixing stuff, just to make sure that it wasn't going to happen again. I haven't seen the amp for a few years now, so I'm hoping that, you know, it could have been a manufacturing process, or duff solder, for example. But a printed circuit board is far, far tougher. Now, with guitar amp synthesis, we have companies like, Roland, for example. They made the Blues Cube a few years ago, and I've heard a couple of them, and it's scary. And people have taken this kind of Pepsi challenge with these amps. You know, is this the Roland amp, or is it that boutique Fender over there that was 6-7 times the money? And is it a sort of mid-price Fender, or is it a Roland this, or is it a Cube that, or whatever? And the results are startling, because people go, this is really guitarists are going, "Oh yeah, that sounds amazing, that's like the boutique amp," and they've picked the Roland, for example. Of course, you know, the data is difficult to interpret, but what is not difficult to interpret is that things like that really stack up with these sort of traditional guitar amps. Now, things like recording. I worked for EMI for a couple of years as a studio technician. My degree is in electronic engineering. So I was hired to look after the stuff. So I was looking after old Studer 2-inch tape machines and SSL consoles. You can buy SSL E series and G series channel strip plugins for computer. I worked on the original desks, and yes, they sounded great, but they were a pig to look after. You know, you just sort of forever reseating channels, lifting a whole channel out of a mixing desk and slamming it back in because it was just a loose connection, or a bit of moisture got in there. So the original components, I worked for UB40 after I worked for EMI in London, and bizarrely, an E-series desk followed me from the studio I was working in London, which was Townhouse Studios, up to Depp Studios in Birmingham. I went, "I've seen this desk before." Oh. And I was, you know, my job was to put the thing in, was to help commission it and wire it in. And the same faults befell this desk as they had in London, and the desk was just getting more and more and more creaky. Not so the computer. Of course, if a computer goes wrong, sometimes it's just, that's it. And that's the risk you take. Of course, we all back up our work, don't we? But a computer really does offer so much of a solution, and lots and lots of guitarists who have all of this wonderful old valve technology are sat in front of a computer. So they are transistorizing their valve recordings. So I ask you, is it really worth the hassle to have all of these valve amps and to have to mic stuff up, or are you going to plug into a computer? I think I know where I am with it. Of course, if I'm asked to do a job with my Vox AC30 and they want it mic'd up in a room with a room mic and a this room and a that room in a wooden wherever, then of course I'll do it. But for the vast majority of the time, guitar, lead, audio interface, plugins. That's all I need.